So for larger plantings, larger scale plantings, you need to do a few things. You need to consider having burn barriers, and you need to have a burn permit. And you need to have good site preparation so that the soil is well tilled, so that you're removing all the non-native vegetation that was there originally. So the first thing that you need to do is prepare your site. So usually when we start out, we've got a very degraded site. So it's a turf grass, or it's an old field, an agricultural field. So you need to take that soil and you need to remove all the vegetation, because if you have competition for the native species, then the native species won't come and the weedy species will just take over, and they become a big problem. Traditionally what you do is you till the site, and some people were spraying, so you spray the site and then you till, and then you spray again and again. But I found that repeated tilling, so you allow the weed species to germinate, and then they come up about 10 centimeters, and then you till it again, and then you let them grow again and till it again. And what that does is, because you're tilling the soil repeatedly, you're depleting the seed bank of these weed species. And so by the end of a season of tilling, that you've actually depleted the seed bank, and when you seed the native species in the fall or the next spring, that it allows for the native species to come up without a lot of competition from the weedy species. So the next thing you do is seed the field. So here you can see my son is hand broadcasting a field. There are many different techniques of seeding the field. So we use about 60% grasses and 40% wildflowers typically. Some people are using more 50-50. They're finding that it gives a more balanced mix. The grasses are providing your erosion control, so holding the soil, and the prairie wildflowers and the meadow wildflowers are providing some of the biodiversity that the pollinators need, that the songbirds need. So you want to have a nice mix of that. So that means typically we're using about 10 pounds per acre of grasses and about 2 pounds per acre of wildflower seeds. We use less wildflower seeds because the wildflower seeds are much smaller, and the grass seeds are much heavier. And typically we use about 10-to-1 oats, because the prairie species are very small. So if you're spreading them in the field, you'll use them up very quickly. So we mix it about 10-to-1, and that allows for a more even distribution. And the oats, you can use sand, you can use vermiculite to mix it in about 10-to-1. And when you spread it, you'll be able to actually see it, whereas the prairie seed and the meadow seed is very hard to see when you throw it. And usually I like to use the annual oats, because the annual oats is actually a good cover crop. So when you spread it, you're actually seeding your cover crop at the same time, which makes it a lot easier. And hand broadcasting is an easy way to do that. You can do about 3 acres with about 6 people in a couple hours, so it's not too difficult to do. So once you've seeded the site, you need to pack it into the soil. So if the seed doesn't get good seed to soil contact, then it also won't germinate very well. So if it's sitting on nice fluffy soil, that soil wicks away the moisture very easily, and when it's compacted, the moisture from below the soil can wick up, and it keeps some of the moisture close to the seed. So what you need to do is pack the soil down, and here you can see we're using a packer running it across the field. You can use a roller, you can use different things to pack down the soil. For really small sites, one of the things I used to do is I used to tell kids that they were a herd of buffalo, and you'd get a class of 30 and they'd just tromp all over that area, and you get them to tromp for a few minutes, and then that'll be enough to pack the soil down, and they'd be like little buffalo, and they would love that. So here's what the prairie looks like the first spring. You see there's a lot of weedy species. You'll get a lot of ragweed, horseweed, that sort of thing coming in. So you don't see very much growth in the prairie species. And what happens with the prairie species is that maybe you'll get about 4 to 6 inches, 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters of growth for the prairie species, but what they're doing because they have an extremely deep root system that goes meters into the soil, they're spending all that energy in the first year driving that root system deep into the soil, so that when they have a drought or when they have low nutrient conditions, their roots are deep into the soil and they can survive. And so by the third year, that's when the prairie species really start to thrive and the ecosystem really starts to look like you've got something. So a lot of people, when they first establish a prairie, they're like, oh, nothing's happening. So you have to be really patient with the ecosystem, and you have to nurture it along the way. And you have to be patient. The first year is not going to do too much. You may get a fair bit of annual weeds in there, and you have to go in and you have to control the perennial weeds. By the second year, you start seeing a bit of wildflowers, the black-eyed Susan, the monarda, that sort of thing starts flowering. And by the third year, you start getting things like Indian grass and different prairie grasses start flowering as well. So it starts looking like a prairie ecosystem. But it takes that time period for the meadow to stand, or the prairie to fully integrate and to actually come together. So for wildflower plantings, typically we do a little bit more, we shift the seed mix a little bit. I use a lot more little blue stem in a wildflower planting, because what little blue stem is short and the native wildflowers can come up through that and you can see them more easily. For different prairie projects, we've done up to about 70% wildflowers and 30% grasses, if that's what you're looking for, is more of a wildflower planting. You want to make sure you're using native species and not using one of these meadow in a can type things where they're using California poppy and that sort of thing that grows for a couple of years and then completely degrades into weeds. So you want to make sure you're using native species that are native to the region that you're working in. So for next steps, typically it takes 3 to 5 years for the prairie or meadow to really integrate itself and to start to grow in and really look like a prairie or meadow. So after a period of time though, the meadow or prairie is going to start accumulating a lot of biomass, and these ecosystems are fire dependent. So what happens is you need to remove the biomass periodically, either through burning or through harvesting the straw and removing that and taking it off the land. Invasive species are another thing that you need to deal with on a regular basis, especially if you're in something like the city of Toronto or some other urban area and you're trying to create a meadow ecosystem. Invasive species are going to be a major part of your management plan moving forward. So every 3 to 5 years, typically, you remove the biomass, and then you go in and you're removing shrubs, you're removing the invasive species out of there, and just managing it and keeping that ecosystem healthy.